Welcome to History Hijinks, the show where I take a topic and tell you all about why it's way more hilarious than you ever could have imagined. Today, we're going to dig into the glories of the Italian Renaissance and learn about the artists who actually made it happen. Because we've talked about historical context before and we've even discussed some famous works, but we haven't fully appreciated just how bonkers and or badass some of these artists really were. So, to get a sense of what Renaissance life was like, let's do some history. We begin at the turn of the 1400s, when this Sassance business was just starting to be reneged. Our first protagonist was born in Florence, a Mr. Filippo di Ser Brunellesco di Lippo Lapi, who... God, I'm sorry. It just sounds made up. Jeez. Okay, anyway, Brunelleschi, as he was known, was educated in math and trained as a goldsmith, and he caught his first big break in 1401, when the city held a contest to redecorate the bronze doors of the famous baptistry. As their task, Filippo and 6 other sculptors mocked up one scene from the eventual 8-panel door. To his lifelong frustration, the jury passed on his complex and dramatic scene for the simpler and more classical composition of Lorenzo Ghiberti. Filippo refused to be second best at anything, but he took this loss in stride. Just kidding. He stormed out of Florence immediately and vowed never to sculpt again. And that's pretty indicative of Brunelleschi's temperament. Instead, he devoted his focus to architecture during the years he spent with his pal Donatello in Rome. When he returned to Florence, Brunelleschi's first job was designing the Ospedali degli Innocenti as a radical reconstruction of ancient Roman design. But if you look at those arches, it was also a casual audition for a much larger semicircle: the Dome. When the city launched a new design contest in 1418 to finish the as-of-then uncapped Duomo, Brunelleschi smoked his old rival Ghiberti. It may have taken 2 decades, but the revenge was sweet, and it smelled like construction mortar. According to popular legend, architects were tasked to stand an egg upright on a slab of marble, and Filippo's solution was simply to smash the bottom of the egg into a base. This story is almost definitely fabricated, but it is absolutely the kind of dramatic trick that Brunelleschi would pull. Now, when it came to building the dome, hoisting the material 50 meters in the air was only part of the problem, as Filippo's most stubborn components were his workers. For them, just arriving for work all the way up those stairs was enough of a pain in the butt, so when they broke for lunch and went back down, they stayed down and just went home. Brunelleschi's solution was to build a kitchen inside the dome so that his workers had no excuse to bail early. He also watered down their wine because professionals gotta have standards. After the dome was finished, which, by the way, the city held another contest to design the lantern on top, which Ghiberti had the gall to apply for. Brunelleschi would sooner die than let that hack lay a finger on his masterpiece, so Filippo entered and won the competition. He actually had to overcome the slight hiccup of a studio assistant stealing his plans and submitting them as his own work, so Brunelleschi fancied up his own design in secret before submitting it again. Some people have described Brunelleschi's personality as egoistic, perfectionist, brash, and aggressive, and while true, these all kind of miss the real point. Filippo Brunelleschi was an absolute diva, plain and simple. And truly, nobody can rediscover the nuances of classical Roman architecture without storming out of their hometown on a decade-long cross-country temper tantrum. A few years later, just outside Florence, we first meet the man so smart it actually makes me angry: Leonardo da Vinci. Born the illegitimate child of a notary and a peasant, the only thing going for our boy Leo was his insatiable curiosity. Italy had painters and natural scientists and maybe even a few talented engineers, but not like this. Leonardo's first job in Florence was in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, helping prep and fine-tune the master's paintings. Famously, his work on the angels and water and the baptism of Christ are far better than Verrocchio's own brushwork on Jesus and John. Some stories exaggerate that Verrocchio stormed out and never picked up a paintbrush again, but that's more up Brunelleschi's alley. Though, point stands, Leonardo was flexing on the city's best painters just in his 20s. In 1482, Leonardo sent a job offer to the Duke of Milan in the form of a silver lyre cast in the shape of a horse's skull. I'm gonna breeze past how f***ing metal that is and be glad that our kiddo got himself a promotion. For the next 17 years, he worked for the Milanese as a painter and as a theater engineer. Yep, you got that right, Da Vinci did tech. It's here that he worked on his best painting, The Last Supper, where he sometimes painted from dawn until night without a break, and sometimes went days on end without painting anything. The prior of the convent was extremely frustrated with Da Vinci's schedule, so Leonardo very politely asked the Duke if he could use the prior's face as the model for Judas. Oof. After fulfilling his art credit requirement, Leonardo began working on military equipment for the Duke of Milan and eventually for Cesare Borgia, with some notable sketches including a 12-barreled gun and a full-ass tank. Now, it's a good thing Da Vinci was more of a designer than an inventor because these things are straight-up nightmare fuel, but we can tell from his notes that he didn't want anybody building it. He deliberately drew the gearbox for his tank backwards so that the wheels would lock and the machine would be useless. Aside from the murder wagon, Leonardo designed a helicopter, a parachute, a flying machine, and even a metal robot, but we only discovered his metric tank load of inventions when his notebooks were published decades later. See, for most of his life, and a good couple centuries after his death, Leonardo was primarily known as a painter, and everybody could see that he understood the human form, but it was only when we cracked open his notebooks that we figured out why. Da Vinci sketched dozens of living figures during trips to and from the market, but he also dissected corpses to understand things like muscle structure and how our eyes process light. Slightly illegal, yes, point taken, but Leonardo's anatomy studies also gave us the Vitruvian Man, the apex of T-posing. Anyway, Da Vinci hopped around between Florence and Milan and eventually into France before dying in 1519. For all his varied talents, his greatest strength was still the curiosity to investigate anything and everything, always finding ways to connect anatomy with painting, with physics, with invention. Damn, that Da Vinci kid was smart. Now, for the shortest but easily most bombastic story on this list, we'll follow the life and times and murder and more murder of Benvenuto Cellini, the only Renaissance artist who acts like they're somebody's psychotic Dungeons & Dragons character. Born in 1500 and given a goldsmithing apprentice in 1515, he was banished from the city of Florence just a year later for starting a Romeo and Juliet Act 1 Scene 1 brawl. So he moved to Rome, where he ended up defending the city against a disastrous sacking by renegade Bourbon troops. Now, our source for Cellini is, unfortunately, Cellini, whose wildly extravagant autobiography claims that he single-handedly saved a castle as well as being the one to shoot and kill Duke Charles of Bourbon. Cellini's autobiography is particularly frustrating because it is a decent source for daily Renaissance life so long as you don't listen to anything that he says about himself. 2 years after the sack, a Roman guard was killed by Benvenuto's brother, who was in turn killed by another guard who Benvenuto later killed. He also got into a fistfight with a notary and killed a rival goldsmith, which at this point is just par for the course. Though he briefly fled from Rome, the Pope later absolved him. Still, that makes Cellini 2 for 2 on exiles. Funny thing is, when he returned to Rome, he was arrested on embezzlement charges and thrown in prison, whereafter he did escape, but was immediately recaptured. For a hot minute, he worked at the French royal court, but he was frustrated that he couldn't solve his disagreements by murdering them, so Cellini returned to Florence. He did try to multiclass into being a priest, of all things, but he swiftly gave it up. Wonder whether it was the rules on no murder, no philandering, or worshipping somebody other than himself that sealed the deal. As for his art career, it's a recurring theme that his ability to consistently create art was serially jeopardized by his near constant run-ins with the law. His best work, Perseus with the Head of Medusa, is partially a result of him being too old to commit casual murder on his way to and from his workshop. By all accounts, he would have been a much more prolific artist if he wasn't so much of a narcissistic murder hobo. Though if we asked Benvenuto himself, I think he'd be pretty satisfied with this choice. This last person on our list isn't technically a Renaissance artist, but technically I'm the one in charge here, so it's my rules. Now, this story begins in 1590s Rome, right on the edge of the Baroque period, where the master Caravaggio and his old pal Orazio Gentileschi were working together on various projects throughout the city. In 1593, Orazio had a daughter named Artemisia, whom he taught how to paint. Since Artemisia was, gasp, a woman, she was instantly DQ'd from any of the artist guilds in Rome, so it was only because her dad owned a workshop that she even had a shot at painting. That said, it did the trick because she rapidly picked up some of Caravaggio's talent for coloration, lighting, and scene composition. Now, this is the part where Artemisia's story gets extremely uncomfortable to retell, but her art is fundamentally inseparable from her trauma, so heads up for assault. At the age of 17, she was raped by an artist named Agostino Tassi, who was working on a project with her father. And then, this colossal shithead. He then promised he'd marry Artemisia to restore her dignity, but kept on finding excuses to delay the wedding so that the relationship would continue with no strings attached, except for the omnipresent psychological garrote wire, but never mind that. After about a year, Mr. Gentileschi found out about this and immediately took Tassi to court. Artemisia's testimony was verified by thumbscrew torture, and at one point she called out to Agostino that her thumbscrews were the wedding ring he promised. This, dear viewers, is our first major indication that Artemisia Gentileschi takes no shit. The trial would go on to reveal that Tassi was an even greater scumbag than anybody could imagine, but despite his conviction, he was later pardoned by the Pope. So, Artemisia, 100% done with Rome, hopped up to Florence. But before she left, she completed her first major painting of Susanna and the Elders, a Bible story reframed to show how wildly uncomfortable it is to be accosted while you're trying to mind your own damn business. And this marks only the start of Artemisia taking thematic cues from her own experience, because her next painting was her interpretation of a famous Caravaggio of Judith slaying Holofernes. And to appreciate her talent, let's compare between the two, because look at this! Caravaggio, buddy, your Judith has never held a sword in her life. She needs to put her shoulders into it. Now, there we go. Artemisia knows what I'm talking about. That's how you decapitate a man. See what I mean? Gentileschi was no slouch, and you can tell exactly what was going through her mind when she was painting that. She's not just a good artist, or a good artist despite the limitations on women, she was great because her work was so uncompromising and vividly autobiographical. Her fame quickly spread, and her time in Florence saw her painting for the Medici court and earning a spot on the Accademia di Arte del Disegno, and soon enough she was painting for clients in Venice, Naples, and even the King of England. After Artemisia's death in the mid-1650s, she fell off the artistic radar for a few centuries, but since the feminist movement in the 1970s, there's been a huge resurgence of interest in Artemisia, and for damn good reason. Her art shows how all of us can take trauma and turn it into something powerful. Taking the old stabby-stab revenge will just cause more legal issues, but taking revenge through art means that everybody can get some much-needed catharsis. So, what have we learned? Well, if you're gonna be a diva, you gotta back it up with talent. And no matter what your field, it always helps to be curious. Be mindful of your work-life balance, and adjust it sharply if that balance includes murder. And finally, when you find yourself in a rough situation, ask yourself, what would Artemisia Gentileschi do? Because in every situation, the answer is take no shit. Alright, thank you so much for watching, and thanks to our fantastic patrons who voted on the name for this new series. If you'd like to have a say in what's coming up next, or have your name in the credits like these cool cats, hop on over to patreon.com/OSP. Catch you all in the next video.